Children today grow up learning that the Earth goes around the Sun along with the other planets, but that wasn't always the case. Centuries ago, before satellites and telescopes, people didn't know how the universe worked. All they could do was make up theories based on their angle from where they saw the sky. The path to our current theory wasn't easy, and anytime there was an idea that was radically different from the current one, it was met with opposition. In 1543, in Nuremberg, Germany, a man named Nicholas Copernicus published 6 books that highlighted his beliefs that the Earth revolved around the Sun. This started a conflict with the Roman Catholic Church, who believed that Scripture said that the Earth was in the center of the universe. Copernicus himself did not face the conflict as he died soon after publishing, but his believers did. An Italian scientist named Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake for heresy on February 17, 1600, for supporting heliocentrism with other heretical theories. Galileo Galilei was saved from being burned at the stake because he recanted, and he was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. After centuries of debate and prosecution, in 1822, the Church agreed to accept published works supporting the heliocentric theory. Even later in 1992, the Church officially reached a compromise to agree that the Earth is not stationary. 8 years later, Pope John Paul II apologized for past mistakes of the Church, including the way they treated Galileo. A philosopher named Aristotle, who was born in 384 BC and died in 322 BC, thought that the Earth was stationary in the center of the universe and all the celestial objects revolved around the Earth. He thought this because the Earth didn't seem to move, and when you threw a ball up in the air, it didn't land behind you like it would if you were moving. This is like when you're sitting in a car and the scenery seems to move backwards and it feels like you're sitting still in the car even though you're moving. But people started noticing that sometimes the planet seemed to move backwards all of a sudden. Then another philosopher named Ptolemy, who lived from 100 to 170 AD, tried to explain this by including epicycles, or circles within circles in the orbits of planets. This model of the universe, called the geocentric model, eventually became embedded in Christian beliefs. Then, in 1515, a man named Nicholas Copernicus decided to challenge that. Nicholas Copernicus was born on February 19, 1473, in Torun, Poland, to Nicholas Copernicus Sr. and Barbara Watson Road. He enrolled in the University of Krakow in Italy in 1491.
Copernicus was in fact sent to Italy to graduate school to study both regular law and canon or church law. But while he was at it, he got some tutorials in astronomy. But all the time he was keeping up, buying astronomy books. And that was very important because Copernicus did live in the early days of printing, and it made it possible for him to get a lot of material that way.
He decided Ptolemy's model was too complicated to have naturally occurred. Ptolemy also placed the Earth at an eccentric, or not perfectly at the center of the orbits. Copernicus thought this was not right because he wanted perfect harmony in the universe. He said that the Sun, not the Earth, was the center of the universe, and after the planets there was a sphere of immobile stars. He was not the first person to propose this, but he was the first to publish geometric calculations to support it. He also guessed that the Earth rotated every 24 hours on its axis to explain the rising and setting of the Sun, which he was right about, but this went against normal common sense.
The whole thing was completely ridiculous. If the Earth is spinning around every 24 hours and you throw a stone up into the air, it's going to land in another county. And think of the poor birds. So Copernicus was going against all common sense.
Copernicus did not want to publish his book for fear of criticism, but his friends convinced him to. Copernicus says in his book, "The scorn which I had reason to fear on account of the novelty and unconventionality of my opinion almost induced me to abandon completely the work which I had undertaken. But while I hesitated for a long time and even resisted, my friends drew me back." Copernicus's book on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres did not cause much anger immediately, because a man named Andreas Osiander added a preface saying that it was just a hypothetical book. But afterward, when people started believing him, it became a problem. One man who was punished for supporting the heliocentric theory was Giordano Bruno. In 1548, Bruno was born in Nola, Italy, to Giovanni Bruno and Fra Lisa Savolino. At age 24, Bruno became a priest and started learning theology. Soon he came under the investigation from the Inquisition for heresy. He soon fled Italy and started traveling all over Europe. Wherever he went, he made enemies. He published a book, Sina della Signoria, where along with supporting heliocentrism, he talked about his own theories about how there were infinite stars and infinite worlds. In 1591, he moved to Venice on an invitation from Giovanni Mocenigo. There, in 1592, he was arrested by the Inquisition for heresy. After he refused to recant, he was imprisoned for 8 years, where he was interrogated periodically and told he could save his life by recanting. In 1600, he was taken to the Campo de' Fiori in Rome and burned alive, where a statue of him now stands. Another man who was punished was Galileo, although not as harshly. Galileo was born on February 15, 1564, in Pisa, Italy. He was supposed to learn medicine at the University of Pisa in 1581, but then turned his attention to math and philosophy. But in 1609, he heard of a device that could magnify a distant object and make it look like it was up close. Galileo quickly figured out how to make his own, and he also improved the telescope greatly. With this telescope, on January of 1610, he discovered the moons of Jupiter. The moons, combined with his discovery that the moon had mountains and craters just like Earth, helped support the theory that Earth is a planet. In 1616, the Church declared heliocentrism heresy, and Robert Cardinal Bellarmine warned Galileo not to defend it. They also banned Copernicus's books. But then, in 1623, Mafia Cardinal Barberini became Pope Urban VIII. The Pope was a friend and admirer of Galileo. He gave him permission to publish his theories of the universe as long as he only treated it hypothetically. Galileo published his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems in Florence in 1632, but he made it biased and ridiculed the geocentric worldview, and this was a personal insult to the Pope. In 1633, he was called to Rome and presented with the letter that warned him not to defend the heliocentric theory. Galileo had to deny his belief in the heliocentric system, and he was sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. His book was banned along with Copernicus's. Eventually, people started noticing that the orbits of planets matched up with the heliocentric system better than they did with the geocentric system. Isaac Newton led to the triumph of heliocentrism with his laws in 1687. Copernicus's book was removed from the list of forbidden books in 1758. Most people knew that the Earth revolved around the Sun when the Church lifted the ban on Galileo's dialogue and agreed to accept published works concerning heliocentrism in 1822. Then, in 1992, Pope John Paul II declared that the Earth did move around the Sun. He said that theologians were wrong in literally interpreting the Bible. The geocentric representation of the world was commonly accepted in the culture of time as fully in accord with the teaching of the Bible. Some of his expressions, taken literally, seem to be claims of geocentrism. The problem faced by the theologians of the day is that of the compatibility of heliocentrism and Scripture. Paradoxically, Galileo, believing sincerely, was more insightful on this point than his theologian opponents. If Scripture cannot err, he writes to Benedetto Castelli, some of his interpreters and commentators can, and in many ways. The conflict was finally over. Today we know that the Sun is not the center of the universe, but the Earth does revolve around it, and the stars are not fixed, they also move.